Hello, I'm Joanne Sefton and a barrister here at Mitchell Law. Today you're joining me for a very special tea break because for the first time we have a guest. This is Caroline Gourlay.
Hello, thank you for inviting me to join your tea break.
Some of our viewers might already know Caroline. For those who don't, she's an independent business psychologist based in Bath. Caroline, would you be able to give us a brief introduction to what you do?
Thanks, Joanne. There are two main services that I provide to organisations. The first is in-depth psychological profiling of people for senior roles, whether that's recruitment, promotion, succession planning. And the second is leadership coaching. And sometimes that's developmental when somebody's new in a role or has a clear development need. And other times I act as a sounding board for senior leaders on a long-term basis. I do some work with leadership teams too, and I also get asked about random issues related to people at work.
I think the reason that you as a psychologist can have such an impact on a business or organisation is because every business is ultimately the sum of the people in it. Mm-hmm. And that's something that the HR professionals in our audience are completely switched on to. And that's why we thought there'd be some real interest from that audience in some insights that you could give. If it's all right with you, I have a few questions for you.
Fire away.
Okay, so firstly, if an organisation is recruiting for a senior leader role, what are the key things they can do from your perspective to make sure they get the right person?
Well, I'm sure that your HR audience is pretty well versed in understanding how to work out the requirements of a role and assess whether people match these. But one fundamental question that doesn't always get addressed explicitly is whether the job is too big for the person to handle and whether they'll be out of their depth. I'm partly thinking about how well people handle the pressure of a big job. So some of this is about emotional resilience, but more important is whether they can effectively deal with the level of complexity involved, particularly if there's no right answer and no processes or structures to guide their thinking. I have an assessment tool I use to look at this, but you can get a good sense of it with the right interview questions.
What about checking whether people are the right fit for the organisation? What part does that play for you?
Cultural fit is a really interesting one. I mean, obviously you want people who can work well in your organisation and uphold your values. But on the other hand, you don't want a senior team full of clones. And that just leads to groupthink and blind spots in decision making. You need diversity in its broadest sense, not just different backgrounds or genders, but different personality types and ways of thinking.
That's interesting because from a legal perspective, obviously we think of diversity in terms of protected characteristics. But from your perspective, it can mean much more than that.
Exactly. We're all different in the way that we think, the way we solve problems, the things that we find easy, the things we struggle with, what motivates us and so on. And you need that kind of diversity in a successful team. Something I've been working on with one client is identifying what doesn't fit in their organisation.
Okay.
So, what are the red lines that would rule someone out? And this turns the entire process on its head and potentially allows for a broader range of people to be considered. So instead of saying, we're looking for people like this, you're saying, we're looking for people who aren't like that, whatever that might be.
That's really interesting. Can you give a specific example of what that might be?
So, for example, in a very flat structure, people who are very status conscious and competitive might feel frustrated because there's nowhere to go with their career. Or in organisations where they don't have many rules and they give people a lot of autonomy, people who like to know that they're doing exactly the right thing and want some kind of guidance on that might struggle.
Okay. It sounds like getting the fit wrong in that sort of scenario might be one of the things that potentially leads to conflict within an organisation. That was another topic that I was keen to bring up. Is conflict ever good? And can you tell us what the right way to avoid it is?
Well, most people don't like conflict. There are a few who thrive on it, but most of us don't. But we tend to conflate conflict with confrontation.
Okay.
Essentially, conflict just means we want different things. I like this candidate, you prefer that one. And it's really important to air these kinds of differences and resolve them in a constructive way in situations where you can't just agree to disagree. So you can disagree with someone over, say, Brexit and have a really, heated discussion and then just walk away because you don't have to do anything.
None of us can do actually.
None of us can. But if there's a decision to be made, you have to find your way through it. And a lot of teams will fudge this by always deferring to what the boss wants or by keeping things vague. So we want to grow the business.
I think we've all heard that kind of aspiration.
Yeah, but that's not the way to get the best decisions for the organisation. If you have more diversity of thinking, you probably will have more conflict, but that doesn't mean it has to turn into an EastEnders Christmas special.
Okay, so are there ways of having conflict but stopping that from turning into confrontation?
Essentially, it's about emotional maturity. It's about not getting too attached to your own ideas, not getting defensive, and keeping in mind what's best for the organisation. But of course, that's easier said than done. Something I sometimes do with senior teams is to get them to think about the criteria that they will use to make a major decision before they get into discussing the decision.
Right.
So it's a bit like when you're buying a house and you decide in advance, well, it has to have this many bedrooms or whatever it is. You work all that out before you start looking, and it makes it more objective. Even if you decide that one of the criteria is how you'll feel about it.
Okay. So slightly different subject. In your view, what makes a good HR director?
I think a key characteristic is pragmatism.
Okay.
Yes, you should keep up to date, you should look at best practice, put in place high quality HR solutions, but you have to work with your organisation where it is rather than where you'd like it to be.
Yeah, that really resonates.
Yeah. The HR directors I've seen who've been most successful become allies to the business. They solve problems for people and they gradually move managers' thinking on, rather than creating sort of fantastic all bells and whistles HR solutions that they then have trouble getting implemented.
Okay. Thank you very much, Caroline. I've really enjoyed having you on as our first tea break guest. We're going to put up your website details on the end shot so that people can see that, and I'd also recommend that viewers might want to sign up to your blog, because I get it. You pick apart some really useful topics every month in much greater detail than we've been able to chat about today.
Thank you, that's very kind. I hope your viewers have found the discussion interesting. Thank you for inviting me along.
Thank you.